Hello friends, welcome back to your channel Demystify Frontend, and this is yet another video in the series Build Your Own Angular Forms. Let me give you a very quick recap what we did in the last video, and if you have not watched it, I have attached the link in the description. So from last few videos we have been working on the validation, like how the template driven validation works under the hood, and we are basically developing the support of validation in our ngModel implementation. So in the last video we separated the validation logic from the ngModel to different directives so that we can scale the validation easily, right? So what we did, we separated the validation logic from ngModel to different set of directives, and we developed one such directive, that is required validator, and then we applied the required validator through a selector. As you can see on the text box here, we applied the required validator, and based on the required validator, the instance of this required validator directive was created, and it configured itself on this ngValidator di token as a service. And ngModel basically injected this di token, and through that di token it get access to this required validator, right? So we did two things here. First, we separated the logic of validation so that we can scale the validation easily by defining more validation directives and even defining the custom validation directive, right? All we have to do is like defining a validation directive and configuring this di token, right? And ngModel has to do just simply one thing, just injecting the di token. And but if you see the solution we developed in the last video, it ngModel accept only a single validation, right? But that's not the case with the real life application, where on any of the form inputs you can apply as many as validation directives as you want, right? So I'm talking of template driven forms. So here, as we have defined the required validator, we can also specify some more validation directives like min length, max length, or even the custom directive. Okay, for now, when the ngModel injects this di token, it gets a single validation directive reference, a single validation directive basically, right? But what if we apply more than one validation directive on this host element? In that case, we should be able to read an array of all the validation directives whichever are applied on the host element, and then ngModel can simply compose a single validator function and set it on the form control, so that next time when we update the form control value, it can run that validator function and revalidate the data which we are passing to the input. So without wasting your time, let's get started. So let's create one more validation directive, that is MinLengthValidator. So let's move to the code and let's move to the validator.ts, and you will find this file under the form source directives folder. And you can see here what we did in the last video. We defined this validation directive and we configure this di token. We have defined this injection token, dependency injection token, and we configure it with this required validator. So likewise we will be creating one more directive here, so I'll just copy it and paste it here, and I'll make the changes. So first of all, this should be applied on the basis of its selector. So let's give it a selector, that is min length. Okay, so min length will ensure like the input data should have a minimum required length. So let's rename the class now. Let's rename it min length validator. Okay, and let's pass the reference of this here, and it should also accept one input property, right, by the same name, min length. And what will be the type can be a string or number, so you can pass either a string or a number to this input property. Okay, so this is a non-null value. All right, now let's define our validate function, right? So you know who will call this, basically the form control, right? The form control calls this method validate. And if you have not watched my video where I deep dived into the form control, like how the form control works under the hood, how it is organized, then I have attached the link in the description. You can check it out later. Okay, so what I will check here, so basically all I have to do is I'll have to check if control dot value dot length is less than the min length. Okay, so if it is a string, then I'll have to convert it into number. So that we can do by prefixing it with this plus operator, right? It's an easy hack. All right, so then we have to return some error, otherwise we can simply return null, right? So if the control value length is less than min length, then means this is not a valid input as per the min length validation. So what we will do, we will pass the error, and in the error we can pass some information like what is actual length, and the actual length is the length of the value which the user has provided, and we can also pass what is the required length, right? So the required length, the length which we accept, so that is, we can say min length, right? So that's the validation, we have put up it in place. Now the next thing we will have to do, here you can see we are configuring this provider, right? But this way we are basically overriding it. So whichever validation directive applies at a later point in time, it will override the previous one, right? Because it's a single provider DI token. All we have to do, we have to make use of this multi key here, multi configuration, and that makes it a multi provider DI token. That means it can be reused by multiple validation directives, right? And based on how many validation directives are applied, they will basically uh, configuring the same DI token, and they will fill the array against this DI token with as many as directives applied on the host element. Okay, and now provide this multi configuration on here as well. Okay, so this is it, and now next thing we'll have to do is I have to export this validation directive so that it can be used in the rest part of the application. Okay, just import it. Okay, so now come back to our diagram. Okay, so we have defined one min length validator, and we have converted this DI token as a multi-provided DI token. Now the next thing is the ngModel, like how ngModel deals with the array of validation now, right? So let's go to the ngModel directive. Let's check if we are getting any error. Nothing. Let's move to the ngModel here, and in the ngModel, if you see the constructor, how we injected this DI token, we injected it in here. Now it's not a validator, basically it's an array of validator, right? So since it's a multi-provider token, so multi-provider DI token always gives you an array, right? Okay, so it is an array of validator, all right, or it can be null as well, right? If we have not provided anything, so we can annotate it with both the types. So validator can be null or it can be an array of validator. And also I'll basically rename this TI token as validators, right? Make it plural because we are getting multiple validation directives here. Now I'll just rename it ngValidators, and the same thing here, and this is where we have defined it. Okay, now let's go back and make the changes. Okay, now I guess it should be fine. It's not required now. So what we are going to do here, basically we will define one method, and that will prepare a validator function, right, for us. So we will create a composed validator function from these array of validators, right? So let's define one such property on this class and name it composed validator function. Okay, I'll prefix it with the underscore just to highlight like this is a variable which we are going to use only internally in this ngModel class. So composed validator function, right? And what is the type? Its type is basically it's a function, right? And it can be null as well, and just initialize it with this, right? So we will prepare it only when we are receiving some validation directives, right, through this DI token ngValidator, and which we will get only when some when some validation directives are applied on that host element, right, where you apply the ngModel. Now let's go to the setup control. Before going there, let's define one method and let's name it set validator. Yeah, that would be fine. Yes, and it receives the validators, array of validator or null, right? So we will simply call this here set validator, and we will pass the injected validators here. Let's rename it to validators, right? Okay, so now let's define. So basically what we will do, we will check if we have the validators, then we will compose a single validator function. Okay, so the validator function, it will accept a control, right? It will accept a control having type abstract control, and what it will do, it will return either the validation errors or null, right? So let's define it, and the next thing we will have to do, we will have to define it, and then we will basically set up, when we set up the form control, right, which tracks the value, validity and status and the errors. So we set the validator function here, right? So now this is the validator function which we will be setting here, the composed validator function, right, which we will prepare now. And we can get rid of these things, right, and we can simply check if we have a validator function, then simply set it on the form control, right? Now comes the point what this validator function does. So first we will have to basically iterate over each of the validation directives and invoke its validate method, pass the control to that. And the validate method, as you know what it does, it basically accept a control and it returns the validation errors or null depending on the whether data is valid or invalid. So that's all we have to do, and we will then return a single error object. Constant errors, it holds the array of the errors which each of the individual validation directive has returned. This is a composed validator function, right? So it should return a single validation error object, right, or null. So we will have to merge all the error objects which we hold in the errors array into a single object, right? So how can we do that? We can simply call errors.reduce, and to the reduce we will pass the callback, and this callback basically takes two parameters. One is for the accumulator, another is for the error, and we can pass the initial value of the accumulator as this empty object. And what we can do, basically simply merge the current value of the accumulator, and we can merge the current error object, right, into this. So this way we will basically merge the array of error objects into a single error object. Okay, so let's check now why are these marked as invalid. Let's debug that. So for that, what we will have to do, let's open the form control or abstract control, yeah, and let's go to the calculate status and let's refresh it. And what is this pointing to here? This points to the Sakshi. So this is the form control we created for the first name, first input field, that is first name, and it is marked as valid, but still we are getting it as invalid because our error object is a non-null value, it's a empty object, right? And why it is empty object? Because of this new validator, this new composed validator function which we just wrote, right? If you see, we are returning a composed validation error object. So either it will be an empty object or it will have the some keys which denotes the validation error, right? So we'll have to make update in our form control, in our abstract control, and instead of just relying on the errors, if we have a key present in the object, in the errors object, then it's a invalid, means we have some errors on the form control, otherwise it is valid. Now let's check if it fix that issue. Let's remove the debugger and run it. Yeah, now it is gone. Now it is gone. And let's check. Yes, so this is the one validation which we applied, that is required, and it is working fine. Now let's test our solution whether it is functional with the multiple validations or not, right? So let's go to the app component, and so let me check what is the selector I have defined for this new validation, and that is min length, right? Okay, so let's go to the app component HTML, and next to the required, let's apply the min length as well, and to the min length I pass 3, right? So I put a min length validation of 3 characters on this first input, and also I'll have to place the validation error here, right, based on this. So first I'll make it as div, right, otherwise they will span in the same line, and then I'll copy this one. Okay, and then I'll change the error to the text. So this is a class which Bootstrap provides, and let's copy it and paste it. And this one, yeah, so in the errors object we will have all the errors based on which validation is passed, which validation is failed. So if we have the min length validation which is failed, which we can receive in the errors object as min length key, right? Okay, so we'll have to do one more thing here. Instead of passing it as an object, we will have to pass it on the min length, right, min length key. So this is what it returns, right? So the min length returns the object, like in the required we passed the object with required as key, and here in the min length, in this we return the object min length, right? And in the min length we have some information which we can use in the app, we can use to show the validation errors, right? So let's go back to the app component.html now. So we read the min length key here, and if we have the min length error present, we will simply convey that back to the user. Please enter at least this many characters for this field, right? And how many characters, how will I get to know about it? So which I can simply read it through the errors object. So min length, as you saw, on the min length we have this required length property which we have defined. So we can simply call that control errors required length, yeah, right? So let's check now. So let's clear it, and you will see we are getting both the errors. Now please provide the first name, please enter at least 3 characters. As soon as I enter something, the first error should vanish. Yeah, it is vanished, and the second should disappear when I met the criteria, that is I have entered the 3 characters. So 1, 2 and 3, yeah, it's gone. If I remove the 1 character, and then I'll again see the error, right? So you see how easy it is, easily it is working like a breeze. Okay, similarly we can check it for the another one as well, another input. Please enter at least 2 characters, right? So you can see it is working. So that's all from the validation in this video, and in the next video we will see how we can you know, customize our validation directives a bit more, right? Because for now you can see the character, now this can be dependent on some other conditions, like what should be the validation. So we should be able to update our validations as well on the runtime. Like now suppose I want to pass a different value, like what should be the minimum character length dynamically, like it is changing based on some other inputs. So how will I accommodate that change? So we will see that in the next video. Till then, take care, bye bye, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video. Thanks, bye bye.